Hello, and welcome to part 2 of building a campaign adventure. I don't know what I'm going to call this by the end of this, but in the last video we built up the first part of the dungeon the party will be exploring, the village that connects to the salt mine, where they have to go in and defeat a monster. And if they do it right, as explained in the last video, they will know exactly what the monster is. The monster in this case being a shambling mold. If you don't know what shambling mold is, take up your monster manual and turn to page QRS. Turn to page 270. It is a large plant monster that has the ability to engulf the target. But to get to there, they have to go through 3 floors of a salt mine dungeon, of which there are enemies that are either aligned to the monster, are there because the monster is okay with them being there, or basically can use the monster as some form of protection. So, let's get started with the actual dungeon. So, the party will be arriving via the southwestern entrance. So I always draw the entrance to a dungeon in the corner they'll be entering from. So on the last page they entered from the bottom left hand corner. On this page they'll be entering from the top right hand corner, coming in a diagonal line. So we now know where the entrance will be. Now, like before, we're going to take the d6s and to work out the shape of the dungeon. Do this way or do it the other way? The larger area of the mine, this part will be the more excavated part, so we're going to do it this way for this round. So we need 6d6. On the second floor I'll show you another method that I use for planning out dungeons. Now, dungeons aren't really my thing. I don't really like making or using dungeons, but if I do use or make a dungeon, it's usually a pre-constructed, one that is more naturally occurring. So an abandoned mine shaft is quite usual for me. Otherwise, a network of caves or caverns, or a forest dungeon where the characters are moving between trees that block their path. Those are the ones I tend to prefer. I'm not really a big fan of dungeons that were made by someone for a reason. And if I do those are big end of game bosses. Okay, so we're going with a fairly small environment for the outer area. So what this will create will be what the party see, whereabouts the party can adventure. So we've actually got a fairly small environment for them to move through. So entering into a large auditorium. Let's use another method to actually work out what rooms will be in this place. So, going directly northeast, can there be a room that they would see to their left? Absolutely not. So there has to be a route to the left side, going that way on the map, so as the party comes in, it will be to their right. Think logically when you're constructing these, because illogical constructs, although can work, they tend towards, unless the boss of the dungeon or the dungeon is part of a larger story of magically reshaped or magically shaped environments, if it does not follow a reasonable amount of logic, it will pull your players from it. Is at least some recommendation that I can give on this. So I'm drawing a small spider network to fill out the area that they're coming into. And although I'm not necessarily doing anything to particularly lead the party, I like making my party search and hunt. I've never really been a fan of having the loot of a dungeon be in the same area as the final boss, with the exception of course being things like dragons or wyverns or other animals that hoard. If it doesn't hoard, I don't really see why the treasure would be in the same area as the monster. It's that simple, really. Right, create an endpoint there. And already, you might be able to see, we've got what is forming of the map. Yeah, you can see a bit of detail there. It's not much at the moment, but it doesn't need to be much. Because what matters more about a dungeon is what you fill it with, more than what it looks like from a bird's eye view. And again, creating this spider network where the party will have to search to get anywhere. For one thing, it gives you plenty of opportunity to flex your games master muscles, plenty of opportunity to challenge your players, but don't make anything to the point where you're purposefully wanting them to get lost, because your party will start to dislike that. And if they're just going somewhere and getting lost, they're not getting the story. And again, even if you're randomly generating a dungeon, build a dungeon with a story in mind. What do you want to tell? What happened here that meant that these shambling monstrosities came in and took over what was a relatively thriving town that once had an epic hero? Would have probably still had warriors training to try and follow in suit. You don't necessarily want to not tell a story, but don't tell it too obviously. So, what would be a good example? So, let's say the story of this town is that after Giovanni's death, about 500 years ago, which resulted in the archipelago being split from the mainland and turning into these groups of islands, enough time that some may still remember, especially the elven race. We know, for example, in my campaign at the moment, Jimmy, the high elf who runs the Leaping Dwarf, he's been around long enough to remember when it was still solid, when it was still a singular landmass attached to the mainland. And we know that it was a battle between Giovanni and Tiamat that resulted in the landmass being shattered. So, why would the town that Giovanni originally came from be turned to squalor and eventually taken over by monsters? Well, the answer can be quite simple. Maybe the salt mines stopped producing so much, so there was less trade. Maybe they had to dig deeper, and because of that they wound up breaking into the Underdark, which allowed the Myconids to come up. Maybe something to do with the Quaggoths that appear to run rampant in this part of the country. Maybe something more mundane happened. Maybe people started moving away. They heard stories about Giovanni and wanted to follow in his footsteps, and so the most physically capable of their village, both male and female, maybe those who had a bit more affinity for magic, decided to leave, resulting in less people to run the town. There's all sorts of stories you can tell. Now, with the first layer of the dungeon that I've already built, we resulted in one long corridor that splinters off at 1, 2, 3, 4 points. Those 4 points then lead to 1, 2, 3 interconnected rooms. If the party follow the path directly, they will go straight to the second floor. Quite boring. Now that said, they could always do that, miss the story, and miss a couple of encounters. The result would of course be that they miss out on some experience points. And some treasure. So, let's reward them for searching. Let's pull open our Dungeon Master's Guide, which has some help in populating a dungeon. Here we are. So it is page 290 in the Dungeon Master's Handbook, basic one. And it is a section, Random Dungeons. So this will help you creating your dungeon. It will help you at least populate it to an extent. I'm just going to move the storybook there. You can see why you need a fair bit of space when you're doing Dungeon Master planning, because you can spread out to an extent. Right. And I will be using some of this on the next floor to show you what would happen if we completed construct using the random dungeon creator. So that should be interesting. Now, what are we looking for? We're looking for, let's have a look for a doorway. Let's put a doorway right before they go into one of the secret rooms. One of the more structured rooms as well. A room that will be understandable why it may have a door and why it may still have a door, even after all this time. What kind of door is it? We roll a d20, we roll an 11. We get a wooden barred or locked. So we put a lock symbol on it. There we are. And that tells us that the door is locked. Let's put a number 1 on that. I'm sure we'd like to know what's in there. And we'll put a 2 and a 3 on our comparent areas. We'll roll out what's in those in a moment. The question then becomes is, do we want encounters in the main corridors? Will there be roaming enemies in this dungeon? And if so, what are they? Now, we know that the predominant 2 enemies in this region are Quaggoths, who are Underdark hunters, who are allied to the Drow, or at least are the servants of the Drow. Or there are, of course, the Myconids. Maybe they come across some more miners. Maybe they come across something completely different. And if we look for something different, we check the monster manual. So, both the monster manual and the Dungeon Master Guide do have perfect lists of where you might find certain enemies and what certain enemies might do or might have. And we're clearly looking mostly at humanoids and plants, being that this is a swamp. So, what exactly are we looking for? I'll skip forward I'll skip you forward a few minutes, and I'll tell you what I find. Alright, so I've managed to find something I want to throw at them as a intermediary, not necessarily roving, but something they come across. So, at a junction in the road, I'll put an X where I intend to be, they will find corpses. The corpses will be at a distance. It looks like they're moving. As they get closer, they realise they're not moving, they're being eaten. And what they're being eaten by is carrion crawlers. 3 in particular. Large monstrosities that feast on the flesh of the dead. I think something that should surprise the party just a little bit. They are monstrosities, but they're quite insectoid. Again, look at what might align itself properly to the area. If you have the Myconids and you have the village where humans have been killed, so there will be a surplus of bodies, and you also have the Quaggoths, who are monstrous hunters, there will be a glut of corpses. And what is the best place to put the corpses if they're not being used by the Myconids or eaten by the Quaggoths? Somewhere they can easily be disposed of. And a good disposer would be the carrion crawlers. I was also potentially thinking about throwing in some needle blights or vine blights, but those are a bit more surface level than underground. So, we'll be having the X marks the spot as 1 combat encounter on this floor. Let's find out what's in room 2 and 3 and room 1, and then we can work out what else is here. So, and then we'll be rolling up for the carrion crawlers. So I will mark the book as I did before to remember where I left that. We return to the Dungeon Master's Guide, page 290, I believe I said. $290 random dungeons. So we need to know what a room is. We have beyond a door. Well, we know it's going to be a chamber. We've already built the map. So within the chamber, well, that's just the dimensions of the chamber as that section, we really want to see basically what are we going to find in there. So we're not looking for stairs, we're looking for, here we are. So dungeon, we've got lair, maze, mine. Here we go, a mine. So on a d20 roll, that's what dictates behind what is behind the locked door. The answer is 3, which is a bedroom for a supervisor. Now, this is perfect. Don't put any enemies in here. There'll be no enemies to fight. There will be the corpse of the supervisor. Maybe died of starvation, maybe committed suicide. One of those two. Something to shock the party, just a little bit. But because the door is locked, no enemies have gotten in. Nothing has dealt with this body, not even the Myconids. So instead, what do they find in the room? Well, first off, the body of the supervisor. Now, I've done random death a fair bit in the game. Let's go with something a bit more personal. Let's go with committed suicide by hanging. They find his skeletal body hanging from the rafters. Now, the party will search the body, and within the remains of the body, they will find some loot. Let's say a coin purse containing 10 gold pieces. I just rolled a d20 and that happened 10. 10 gold pieces. Perfectly simple, perfectly reasonable. That's a bit too much. Let's make it silver pieces. I've already been very generous with money, and there won't really be many places to spend it, so let's stick mostly with loot. So 10 silver pieces, 1 gold coin. Reasonable for a man living in sort of semi-squalid conditions. On his person as well, there will be a amulet to the god we found earlier. Always remember to check back in your notes. There's something else though, just while I get to this. I've seen loads of things online. I know Deerstalker. I think it's Deerstalker. The guys who do one for all or all for one. I think it's one for all. Fantastic guys, do amazing videos. Absolutely love their work. I'll link to them in this towards the end. Whenever they show the dungeon master of that looking in his book, he's got this absolutely gorgeous leather-bound tome, a bit like this. Now, that does look really cool, and it looks really fancy, don't get me wrong, but my personal feeling on that is that you've got to be really sure that your party is going to go along with all of your plans to make sure that that works. I use the ring binder because the amount of times my party will go in a tangent I am not expecting. I have had what was meant to be a social intrigue game turn into a survival forest game. I have had what was meant to be a simple travel up a mountain, get some treasure back for a local wizard, turn into we're going to take the gemstones out of this sword and fuck up the wizard, and all sorts of things like that. So if you use one of these books, I think you're playing a very risky game, and I am not as confident as you are as a games master to think that my party will follow all my plans to the letter to use a book like that. No, I would rather use the ring binder because I can make lots of notes. I can add to the notes as and when I need to, just inserting pages here and there, and I can also drop pages if need be, if the party aren't going in that certain direction. It's a lot more versatile and a lot quicker to do, and I would definitely recommend it to any games master who have parties who tend to mess around a bit or do something you may not necessarily have expected. So, what was the name of the goddess that we found earlier? It was a religious minor temple to Lunatari, the goddess of neutral magic. That's right, fantastic. And I think again on this person's body, they will find something. I'm thinking a poison dagger. Now, this will be a very, very minor enchantment, I think. Basically still does the base damage of a dagger, but changes the piercing damage to poison damage. Just something a bit bitier. Same stats. Does PSN damage. Non-attuned. You don't want to be attuned to something that boring. Come on. There we are. In the room, they will also find some odds and ends, some effects. Clothing, pickaxe, a few bottles of wine, cheap wine, no, a few flasks of ale. How many? Let's say d12. 11 flasks of ale. What else? I think in terms of additional effects, that seems like a fair amount. A few changes of clothes, an extra tool, some ale, down a few pieces on yourself. Main thing you want to include here is a letter. Now, make a few notes on what the letter will say, but write the letter later. So for whoever finds it, you can hand them that letter and they can read it. That is a great thing to do to really bring the party in. I love doing stuff like that. You won't have heard it because the recordings for the 1E campaign took place afterwards, but I did that with a journal that the party found in the temple of the Pure Maiden. They found Sophia's diary, but it was mostly rotten due to age. But 3 or 4 pages were still legible, just, and those were the pages I handed to the person that found them. So the letter on the table, let's say, overrun mine, dug too deep, sent for help, something bigger came. Basically, using this, you can force the players to see more of the story than they may have been expecting. Something else I recommend to games masters, especially in these times where we have to play over the internet, using functions like Discord or Zoom or Skype or Facebook, what I would recommend is have 2 written up. One is a physical copy you can hand to any players at the table. You've seen from my videos that I always have Jenny, who plays Arya, and Dudley, who plays Lenny, here, because in the 1A campaign they also play Celadine and Roberto. I then also have my older brother Glyn here on the 5E campaign, who's playing Freslin. Now, the reason for that is that I obviously live with my wife Jenny, and Dudley is our housemate, and also our friend, of course, but he's also our housemate, so we all live together. And Glyn will come over because he's actually part of our social support bubble. So we are keeping to the protected methods. But of course, Emma, who is playing Mooley in the 5e campaign, and also Nick and Chris, who are playing Narlock and Zed in the 1e campaign, they obviously live a bit further away. So we were doing distance gaming before all this happened, but obviously with the situation we're in now, a lot more people are doing distance gaming. So don't just have the physical copy for you to hand to players at the table, assuming it's going to be one of them. Have a copy on your phone or on your tablet that you can ping straight over to them if it's one of them that finds it. That way you're not favouring anyone at the table. So that is what will be in room 1. Now let's find out what's going to be in room 2. So we return to the book and we return to the mine. Again, we roll a d20, cacti, 4. A chapel dedicated to a patron deity of miners, earth, or protection. Now, there's a temple just outside the mine. It doesn't make sense why there'd be another one inside. So we re-roll. 20. Strong room or vault used to store ore for transport to the surface. So we know that this mine, they dug up salt for the primary part. So a vault. And within the vault, something that comes alongside salt is crystals. Very, very simple, very, very cheap crystals, but pretty crystals. Gemstones, geodes, that sort of thing. So, let's fill the room with some gemstones. We go to the treasury section. And maybe there's some enemies in here, actually. Let's put some enemies in here. Let's not just give them treasure to get. Let's put something in here that's a bit of a challenge. Should we throw some of those quaggoths in here? Yeah, let's throw a couple of quaggoths in here. Maybe they're sorting through the gemstones. Maybe they're looking for something that they can eat. But again, we could look for other Underdark creatures. Oh, well, of course we have to do it. It's a room full of treasure, or at least a room that looks like it may have once been full of treasure. And right in the middle of the room is a single chest. And in that chest, there is a mimic. Now, the mimic will drop gemstones for the party, of course. So we make notes on that. So vault, once used to contain minerals and ore. Empty sacks. And let's say 2 chests. Left abandoned. 1 will of course be a chest of treasure. Maybe they only decide to open 1 and they get the treasure and they don't have to fight the mimic. But knowing adventurers, they'll probably open both. And if they open 1, then it's just normal treasure. They're less likely to be suspicious of the second. So whichever one they open second, that's your mimic. So we have a loot box, and we have a mimic. Now, mimics in the game are fantastic. I do quite like them. Personally, for the Dark Souls version of mimics, where they unfold themselves into a huge skeletal figure. But in Dungeons and Dragons, they are more like oozes, gelatinous orbs, cubes, that kind of thing. So that's what we're going with. So we need to roll up the hit points for it. We have a hit point range of 9d8 plus 18. Really, that averages out at 58? But then again, I suppose it is a smaller creature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we roll our numbers, hold any that you want to keep, and re-roll any 1s and 2s. That's just my way of doing it. So, got some good numbers to begin with. Got 2 7s, an 8, 2 6s. I'll re-roll the 3 as well. So this could end badly, this could end well. Sort of median. I managed to get higher numbers on 3 of the dice, but the other dice rolled a 1, so it's alright. So, how many hit points does our mimic have? pseudopod on a mimic deals d8 plus 3 damage and has a plus 5 to hit. Has reach. And if it is currently in its object form, the subject has the adhesive effect. The mimic adheres to anything that it touches. A huge or small creature adhered to the mimic is grappled by it. Escape DC 13 on a strength check. Ability checks made to escape this grapple have disadvantage. So, I suppose you could also technically try and escape using dexterity. Or I'm trying to physically hack it off, I suppose, as well. You got lots of options. And the bite does, again, d8 plus 3. But does an additional d8 acid damage. So, that's good to know if you have any party members who are advantage against acid or weak against acid. Always useful. And that has a plus 5 to hit as well. So that should be a nice thing for them to deal with. As for what's in the loot box, let's just find out. So we go to the... I suppose it would be the treasure table, but I don't think we want to give them that much treasure. I mean... Let's say maybe give them so many rolls off of a low value treasure. That's the non-player character. So let's see. So far during the campaign, I like to do loot as a fair cop. If they find this, this will be the loot for both the village and also for so far through the dungeon they've gotten. So at this point we're fighting 3 CR2s and 48, call them CR halves, just to make it fair. Well, 42 CR halves, call it 30 CR halves, just to make it fair on that. Nice big horde fight for that. We'll call that an individual treasure table on the 5 to 10. Now, they're not going to be getting the gold, obviously. They're going to be in gemstone value of the gold. So, let's see what they get. So we take a D100. Give them a roll. 49. That puts them nicely on the second tier, which would have them at 66 times 10 silver and 2d6 times 10 gold. So we'll work all that out as a full gold value, and then we'll work out what treasures they might find. So we open the book. So we open our little notebook. Always good to have a notebook. I always find also notebooks are lovely. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 4, 5, 6. Lots of white dye in that. No rerolls. They get what they get, and they like it. That's 2, 5, 10, 14, 17, 170 SP, so that's 17 silver pieces. And then it's 3d6, 2d6 gold. Ooh, 2 gold, 20 gold. So that gives a total of 37 gold pieces in gemstone weight. Let's even out. Let's there's 4 gemstones in there, each are a 10 GP gemstone. That seems like a reasonable amount to me. And let's look at what might be appropriate to where they are. Anything? Quartz. They find 4 pieces of blue quartz. And that is all they find. Man, they're all right badly on that loot table. Now that said, always remember, note your EXP, so that you can allot your party's experience at the end of each dungeon. Mick is a band 2, so that's 450 EXP. Oh, better make note in the book what the EXP loadout so far for the whole dungeon has been. So that first fight, we worked out that they will be getting 1,200 for that fight, followed by 450 for the Mimic. Now, there are other ways of dealing with enemies besides killing them, or dealing with the enemy in the way that the GM had in mind. Always remember that player ingenuity should count towards their experience gain as well. I've seen it far too many times where players punish party members by not giving them the full experience points because they dealt with the problem in a clever way, or dealt with the problem by avoiding it completely. Dealing with a fight doesn't have to be you're in combat. You stealth around the enemy so that you get out and do the job you need to. That's fine. That doesn't penalise your rogues or your bards. You cleverly work out a way of communicating with the enemy to stop the encounter together. Again, you're not penalising your bards, warlocks or paladins. They managed to convert some of the enemy to their side or convince them not to attack. That is still dealing with a fight, and therefore they should get the experience points. Don't penalise your party for being clever, because for so long as games masters, we spent ages having to deal with gun bunny gamers who just fight their way through the story, not even murder hobos, because they're still enjoying the story, but all they're doing is every time they come across a monster, they are killing it. And you see it all the time, even now, GMs making fun of players who do that, but more so you see GMs making fun of their party for coming up with a solution that they didn't come up with. You should be proud of your party for one-shotting your boss with a clever strategy. That is not your party are bastards, and that is not you can't run an encounter. That is your party have been thinking about this and have been clever. Yes, if they do it through cheating or being a bit arsey and then make fun of you, then add an extra 100 hit points and drop the extra dragon on them. What? Just so we can be proud of them, we can't be vindictive. Right, we need to find out what is in that last room, and then we can finally finish with this. So, we have the mine, we roll a d20, we have an 8. Kitchen used to feed workers. You would expect that in a mine, so fair enough. It's then a question of, will there be any enemies in here? Or will it just be a place for the party to rest after a couple of busy encounters? There is a table if we want to find out. We can quite easily... Let's open this. It's content of the room. That's the chamber purpose. Current chamber state, if you don't already know, very useful for working it out. Here we go, dungeon chamber contents. Let's let the dice decide on this one. It's a 5. There are monsters, the dominant inhabitant. The dominant inhabitant of, especially these floors of the dungeon, are the Quaggoths. So, let's drop some Quaggoths on them. But there is no treasure. So, we'll be tacking on an extra blue quartz to the party, just to be fair. So, in the kitchen, they will fight... Now, they've already fought 3 Quaggoths, one of which was a mage at this point, so let's throw... call it a d4 roll. 2. Very good. So, they'll be fighting 2 Quaggoths. So, it's a kitchen. Destroyed. Nothing of worth. Nothing of note. Very important, nothing of note. And 2 Quaggoths. Two Quaggoths, no Thonots. If you weren't watching the previous video, Quaggoth Thonot is a Quaggoth mage. So Quaggoths are very vicious, underdark monstrosities. QRS, Q becomes more R. Here we go, Quaggoth. Basically, imagine your Wendigo-like creature. They are allied to the Drow in as much as anything might be. And I say that knowing full well that whenever I do play Elf, I do play Dark Elf. Well, I don't want to be a High Elf, come on. And Wood Elves, I've never played Druid in my life. So we have the Quaggoths, and we have 2 of them. So they each have 68 plus 18 hit points. So let's mark that nicely. So in terms of armor class, they're both the exact same with 13 natural armor. And they do d6 plus 3 damage with a plus 5 to hit. I think my party will be quite thankful for this because a lot of things they've come up against have plus 7 to hit. 3 with plus 5. And they make 2 of those attacks per round. And if they drop below 10 HP, then they deal an extra plus 2d6 damage. Always make note of your monster's special abilities. You don't want to get to the end of the fight and turn out you should have done like an extra 100 damage or something. And your party's like, oh, that was so easy. Yeah, one of you should be dead. Just because I forgot. If below 10, squiggle equal plus 2d6 damage. So we're doing 3d6 plus 3 damage. That's quite nice if I can personally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So these ones will be re-rolling any 1s and 2s again. Well, that's already not good. I think I'll even re-roll some 3s. I'm holding the 4, and that is it. Everything else was a 3 and below. Wow, I should have just held the dice. Wow, they are going to be so thankful to me for this. Right, 1, 3, 2, 2, 1. Okay, so the first one will have 5, 9, 10, 17 plus 18, 17, 35. Wow. A very weak, runty, scroggly Quaggoth indeed. Okay, let's see. So keep the 7, we keep the 6s, and we keep that 4. What were the 2? Yeah, that came out better. Okay, so we've got one big, strong one, and one really runty one. Maybe that one's ill, maybe they've just had a fight over some food or something, I don't know. 13, 19, 23, 27, 31, 39, 49 hit points. So quite a bit of difference between these 2. Now, that's not too bad because this party, as you've seen in the last few episodes, are pretty good when it comes down to combat. Which is brew. So, there we go. That's all that happens in that room. There is a fight. Nice and simple. The party can then continue onwards. Oh, we still need to do the X fight. That's right. I almost forgot. X marks the spot will be a fight with some carrion crawlers. So let's pull up the carrion crawlers page. Oh, that's definitely something I need to throw at them for Morians. Huge giants with 13. Oh, challenge rating 8. Not yet, not yet. Soon I will throw things like that at them. Okay, the challenge rating is really good because I have a real problem sometimes with balancing encounters. I tend to make them a little bit too difficult. Now, I have seen a lot of issues with other GMs where they make the fights too easy. My problem is I tend to throw something a bit too difficult at them. So, especially with boss encounters, I'll have 2 sets of hit points rolled up. One at a higher level and one at a lower level. If I think the party is struggling, I will swap to the lower hit point range. If they are coping too well, I'll go to the higher range, and if I think they're coping really, really well, I'll just start adding a couple dice to it. For example, I might roll a d20 and add that many hit points to it, almost as a free action. Purely to keep the party from thinking things are too easy, because sometimes I will I won't roll up quite right. So, X marks stopped. There will be... Call it 3. Let's go with 3 carrying crawlers. Let's make this the big fight for this floor. So, corpses look like they are moving. Moving. Click close. Carrion crawler. Now, if it's an enemy you're not quite used to, as one that you're throwing at people, like I'm quite used to throwing Quaggoths and Mimics and that sort of thing at my players, but I've never used a carrion crawler before. So make sure you note down what page, and if you're using multiple books with multiple monsters in, make sure you note down which book this is in. The carrion crawlers are in the basic monster manual, and they're on page 37. Okay, so we need to mark out 3. We have hit points, armor class, DMG. Now, the damage they do is they get their multiple attack with their tentacle and their bite. So, their tentacle and bite. And they get each of those attacks around. Remember to make note of that. The tentacle does D4 plus 2 and has a plus 8 to hit. Then make a special note over that to remember that this does a DC 13 poison. If fail, paralyze 1 minute. This can be contested though, so make sure you write down that it can be contested. Basically, if you're not used to contested versus non-contested rolls, because I don't think it's really mentioned much in 5th edition, but it was something quite big in previous editions, and it's quite big in other game systems. It's mentioned a lot in RuneQuest, which is personally one of my favourite campaigns, personally one of my favourite mechanics. I will do a review of that properly at some point. Basically, a contested versus non-contested roll is if you can contest a roll, you may roll again every turn. And if you pass, the effects are negated. If it is non-contested, then you cannot roll to get out of it. It is just happening, and you just have to let it happen. God, that sounds a bit creepy. So, make sure to note out all that information across all 3 of the enemies. Yeah, and remember, when noting down damage versus 2 hit bonus, I personally like to put my 2 hit bonus in brackets to keep it separate. The bite, meanwhile, has a plus 4 to hit, so not as accurate. It also doesn't do poison damage, but it does do 2d4 plus 2 damage. So it does a bit more damage. These do not do a lot of damage. To be honest, the main issue with these is they're a bit on the bulky side. A fair bit of hit points. They have the ability to climb. So if I wanted to use these in a scaling battle, where basically I kept dropping them on them, I could do that, where it's basically just raining carrion crawlers. I would be planning that at a future date for a future level, and probably more of a drow-based environment. This is Underdark plant-based. I can't really see the drow wanting to get involved in this area, but the Quaggoths are. Now, all of them have armor class of 13, nothing too impressive. And last but not least, we need to roll up their hit points. They have 6d10 hit points each, and we will roll each separately. I only rolled baseline for a horde fight. If it is similar numbers to the party, I will roll individual hit points. And I don't like using the hit points in the book, I'll be honest. I think the hit points in the book, because they're an average, don't account for enough. So, hold the 6, hold the 9, hold the 7, reroll 5, 2, and 1. Much better. 8, 6, 4. And then we'll divide them by 10s again. So we have a 6 and a 4, that's 10. 9, 17, 23, 30, 40, 58 hit points for the first one. So, a bit beefier than your typical carrying crawler. Cacti. Oh bloody hell, that sucked. 6, 6, reroll everything else, it's 3s and 2s. That's a 7. That's an 8. That's a 6. And that's a 3. So the worst dice there is a 3. So 6, 6, 6, that's 18. 21, 29, 36, plus 18, 44, 54. Again, a little bit beefier, not by much though. And make the last check. Reroll the 3. There we go. 10, 24, 32, 39, 45, 53, 63 hit points for the last one. So one very big one. Right. And that is the entirety of the second floor of the dungeon, first floor of the dungeon, mapped out. Come back for part 2, where we'll plan out the second floor and the boss fight. See ya.